Imagine you're browsing the internet in the early 2000s. Not the internet we know today. Not the sanitized, algorithm-driven feed of TikToks and targeted ads, but the old web, the Wild West, a place where you didn't search for things so much as you stumbled upon them. Now, imagine you find a link on a niche forum, tucked away in a thread about occultism or early cryptography. You click it, and you're transported to a place that feels like it shouldn't exist. No About Us page, no navigation menu, just a bleak, high-contrast void of black backgrounds and jarring white text. No one knows who made it. There's no brand attached to it. No movie tie-in, no corporate marketing campaign. Just a labyrinth of distorted faces, anatomical drawings, and cryptic Latin phrases that seem to be whispering something about the nature of death. This was Mortis.com. For years, it was the ultimate digital rabbit hole. It wasn't just a website. It was a puzzle that consumed thousands of hours of collective human obsession. And the most unsettling part? To this day, it remains completely unsolved. Here is the thing about Mortis.com. It is the Cicada 3031 of the early 2000s, but stripped of the intellectual prestige. It wasn't trying to recruit the world's best cryptographers for a secret society. It felt darker, more nihilistic. It felt less like a game and more like a digital shrine to something we weren't meant to understand. To understand why Mortis.com hit so hard, we have to talk about the era it was born into. Back then, the internet felt like a vast, unexplored wilderness. We had search engines, sure, but they weren't the omniscient gods they are now. There were corners of the web that were simply invisible. If a site wasn't heavily indexed, you could only find it through word of mouth. Mortis.com lived in those shadows. It didn't want to be found by the masses. It wanted to be found by the curious, by the people who were willing to dig. When the first hunters arrived at the site, they didn't find a story. They found a wall. The homepage was minimalist and oppressive. There were no links, no buttons, just a few lines of Latin and an image that looked like it had been ripped out of a forbidden medical textbook from the 17th century. But for the people who spent their lives in the fringes of the web, a lack of links wasn't a dead end. It was an invitation. Here's where it gets weird. The first breakthrough didn't happen on the page itself, but behind it. One of the early hunters decided to check the source code, the raw HTML that builds the page, and there, hidden in the comments, the parts of the code that the browser doesn't actually display to the user, they found a message. Quote, "Look deeper into the void," unquote. That one line changed everything. It confirmed that Mortis.com was a game, or a test, or a manifesto. It told the visitors that the surface of the website was a lie, and the real content was hidden in the architecture. From that moment on, the hunt was on. A decentralized community of sleuths began to form. These weren't professional investigators. They were teenagers on 4chan, adults on obscure forums, and hobbyist coders. They operated through crowdsourced intelligence. One person would find a clue, post it to a forum, and within minutes, someone halfway across the world would translate the Latin or decode the image. The puzzles were brutal. They weren't just riddles. They required actual technical skill. First, there was URL manipulation. The site didn't have a menu, so users had to guess where to go. If you were on mortis.com/start, you had to figure out the logic of the creator. Maybe the next page was /death, or /decay, or /silence. It was a digital game of hot or cold, where the prize was simply more mystery. Then there was the steganography. For those who don't know, steganography is the practice of hiding a file, a message, or an image inside another file. The hunters discovered that some of the disturbing images on Mortis.com weren't just art, they were containers. By opening these images in hex editors or manipulating the brightness and contrast in Photoshop, they found hidden coordinates, passwords, and further Latin clues. The deeper they went, the more the aesthetic shifted. The images became more distorted, the text more fragmented. The content itself was haunting. It spoke of a great work. It discussed the acceptance of death not as a tragedy, but as the only true form of enlightenment. It felt like the website was trying to strip away the visitor's ego, leading them through a digital purgatory towards some imagined revelation. For months, the community was in a fever dream. They were convinced they were on the verge of a massive discovery. Was this a secret society? An occult cult using the internet to vet new members? A psychological experiment on obsession? Every time they solved a puzzle, the creator seemed to anticipate it, adding new, more complex layers to the site. It was a conversation between an anonymous architect and 1,000 strangers. And then, just as the hunters felt they were reaching the center of the labyrinth, the lights went out. Without warning, Mortis.com vanished. No farewell message, no congratulations, you solved it. Just a domain expired page or a 404 not found error. the site had simply ceased to exist. The reaction from the community was a mix of grief and absolute fury. They had spent months of their lives decoding this thing. They had built friendships and rivalries based on the hunt, and in a single second, the entire world they had been exploring was erased. This is where the mystery of Mortis.com shifts. It stopped being a puzzle to be solved and became an artifact to be reconstructed. The archivists took over. They spent years scraping the Wayback Machine and digging through the private hard drives of early users to find fragments of the site. But the internet is fragile. Because Mortis.com relied on dynamic puzzles and hidden URL paths, the archives were useless for actually playing the site. They had the pictures, but they had lost the engine. Mortis.com had become a ghost. So, what was it? There are 4 main theories that still circulate in the digital lore community. Theory 1, the artistic statement. Some believe the site was a piece of net art. In this version, the unsolved nature of the site was the point. The creator wanted to evoke a feeling of dread and curiosity, and the most powerful way to do that was to give the audience a puzzle that could never be finished. The void was the art. Theory 2, the psychological experiment. This theory suggests the creator was a social scientist of sorts, testing how far humans would go to find meaning in a vacuum. It was a study in obsession, how a group of strangers would organize themselves and sacrifice their time for a reward that didn't exist. Theory 3, the occult recruitment. This is the one that keeps the creepypasta writers up at night. The idea that the site was a vetting process. Only the most intelligent, patient, and obsessed individuals were worthy of the final step. Perhaps the people who solved the final puzzle didn't get a game over screen. Perhaps they got an email, an invitation. And finally, Theory 4, the most boring but most likely explanation. It was a promotional tool for a movie, a book, or a game that was canceled in development. The marketing budget ran out, the domain renewal payment was missed, and Mortis.com was left behind as a digital ruin. Regardless of the truth, Mortis.com left a permanent mark on our digital culture. It helped define the rabbit hole archetype. Every time you see a mystery like Cicada 3031 or Sentimental Corp, you're seeing the DNA of Mortis. But more than that, it serves as a haunting reminder of digital decay. We think of the internet as this permanent record, this eternal library of everything humanity has ever thought. But Mortis.com proves that the internet is actually incredibly fragile. An entire world, a complex, terrifying intellectual playground, can be erased by a missed credit card payment. In an era where every mystery is debunked by a 20-minute video or a quick Google search, there is something genuinely magnetic about Mortis.com. It remains an enigma not because it's impossible to solve, but because the evidence has been swallowed by the void. It reminds us that there are still ghosts in the machine, and sometimes the most satisfying ending to a story is the one that never happens.